The United States has faced two major energy crises in the past. This is hard to believe coming from a country that has the ability to go to the moon and back multiple times. However, it has happened. The first being in the 1970s, where an oil embargo made oil prices skyrocket. And the second being fairly recently in our hometown of California in 2000, where there was an electricity shortage. While this has not happened for a couple of decades, it's actually predicted that we will have many more energy crises in the coming future. As according to the environmentalblog.org, our infrastructure increasingly depends upon less resilient, reliable, and secure forms of energy such as solar, wind, and even natural gas. To put it simply, we are focusing on and investing in inferior forms of energy when in reality we already have a viable solution: nuclear energy. Nuclear energy has a bad reputation of being unsafe and dangerous, and there are many false facts that are spread through the media and movies and other outlets such as this. Today I'm going to be addressing them and clearing them up. I will also be discussing how nuclear energy is a far superior form of clean energy, be that it's efficient, less land intensive than other clean energy sources that we use today. Then I'm going to be talking about how if the US focused more on nuclear energy, climate change can truly be combated and another energy crisis can be avoided. So to begin, I'm going to talk about some of the common misconceptions that occur when talking about nuclear energy. Now, because nuclear energy has the word nuclear in it, it's already given a negative connotation for all the wrong reasons. For example, most people believe that a nuclear power plant is similar to a nuclear bomb in which it can explode like one. And that's very false. Not only is it highly unlikely that a power plant would explode, it's impossible for it to blow up like a nuclear bomb. The physical configurations are just entirely different. Another misconception is that the fumes coming out of the stacks on a nuclear reactor are either toxic or they're greenhouse gases, when in reality it's just steam, perfectly safe steam, like when you boil water. And a final misconception is that pretty much sums it all up, is that nuclear energy is dangerous. And you guessed it, that is false. Nuclear energy is incredibly safe, and according to nuclearconnect.org, nuclear energy is as safe or safer than any form of energy available now. No member of the public has ever been injured or killed in the entire 50-year history of commercial nuclear power plants. In fact, recent studies have shown that it's actually safer to work in a nuclear facility than it is in an office building. Misconceptions are a very large part of why we are kind of hindering away from nuclear power. And what's funny is it's actually far superior than other energy sources, which leads me into why it's far superior. Now, over the past couple of decades, the US has developed some pretty interesting forms of clean energy. Most of you may have heard of them. The most popular I would consider in the US is wind, solar, and hydroelectric. Now, while these clean energy sources are being invested in, there's actually a lot of information being skewed, and they come with their own problems and are actually sometimes far worse for the environment than they're made out to be. So I'll begin with solar. Now, according to the article, The Present Status of Solar Power Generation in the United States by Jack Fuller, some disadvantages include very high startup cost, high unreliability due to the fact that it needs the sun, so clouds, overcast, and when it turns to nighttime, it can't really work that well. They're also really bad for the environment in the fact that they need solar batteries, which take heavy metals, which really hurt the environment when you have to mine them out of the ground. And then they're also very land intensive. In order to be efficient and generate a lot of energy, you need a ton of land, and in order to use that land, you have to clear it of vegetation, habitats, animals. It's really bad. Next is wind. Wind is truly no better. As discussed in the article, Wind Power and the Flurry of Limitations by Ozzy Zenner. So some disadvantages are that, again, it's unreliable. It depends upon the wind in order to be able to use it. And I would consider that less reliable than the sun shining. It's also quite dangerous, especially when there's storms. It's been known in heavy storms that they rip apart sometimes, destroying structures and even people. And then again, they're very kind of land intensive, not so much as solar, but in order to be able to be efficient, you need a lot of them in a single area. And this actually has problems with the environment where, there's birds, migration patterns get completely destroyed. And I know that was a heavy debate topic a couple of years ago. And finally, then there's hydroelectric. And hydroelectric is a very interesting one because for a long time it was considered kind of the prodigy clean energy source where it was completely zero greenhouse gas, nothing was wrong with it. And now it's actually kind of becoming the opposite, where it's probably the worst clean energy source and renewable. So aside from a very high startup cost, you have to dam an area which floods it entirely. And obviously that destroys vegetation, kills creatures and habitats. Not only that, it's also unreliable because it also depends on wet and dry seasons, which is pretty unreliable. And then there is the fact that they're finding that it creates methane at the base of the dam where there's a lot of mud and it's not moving. And methane is 10 times more heat absorbent than carbon dioxide, which is really, really bad. And now we get on to nuclear energy, which is much, much different. Now, admittedly, nuclear energy does have a high startup cost, but according to the article Nuclear Energy by Jana Palisser, nuclear energy has a waste that is much smaller than that of other energy sources. It can generate a lot of power, on little land. And it also has a very high lifespan, upwards of 40 years. And it's also very reliable. It doesn't depend on an outside source such as wind or the sun. And water, the only essentially byproduct is water and steam. And I'm going to be talking about all of these in depth in just a second. So the only real waste produced by a nuclear power plant is nuclear waste, which, as we all know, is very bad and harmful. However, they've already figured it out. Essentially, what scientists are talking about is taking this waste to a mountain in Nevada called Yucca Mountain. And it's entirely away from civilization. It's very secure. And essentially, burying this waste in lead and concrete caskets so the radiation doesn't escape, burying it miles beneath the mountain. So it's out of the way of anyone, it's incredibly safe, and it's not harming anyone. Nuclear energy has also been considered the best source of energy to help combat climate change. As discussed in the article The Road Ahead by Charles Ferguson, countries such as the US and other major economic powers like France, Canada, countries like this, they have pretty much considered nuclear energy to be the best bet in solving climate change. Now in the US, this is a little bit difficult due to financial and building implications, especially in California. Building a new nuclear power plant is incredibly hard. But in other parts of the US, it's a bit easier. And because nuclear energy heats water so well, it can actually act as a desalination plant as well. So essentially doubling as energy and fresh water. And that was from the article Energy and Climate Change, Nuclear Pros and Cons. Now, I have mentioned a lot that nuclear energy has pretty much like the highest energy to land ratio, where there's little land and a lot of energy. And to put that in perspective, a nuclear facility in the US needs pretty much just 1 square mile to operate. And to get the same amount of power, a wind farm would need 360 times that to get the same power. And a solar field would need 75 times more of that land. So it is incredibly efficient in terms of energy. So I think the best way to get this information out there is simply education. Media and other outlets continue to fuel the fact that nuclear energy is a primitive energy source that is dangerous and unsafe, when that's simply not the case. If there weren't so many false facts about nuclear energy, there would certainly be a larger push to get the sustainable and clean energy out there and develop more nuclear reactors. By eliminating false facts and becoming more aware of the problem, climate change and an energy crisis can be stopped simultaneously. Not only that, if education was more out there and people pushed for this more, lawmakers and policymakers could provide more financial aid for existing nuclear plants, and that could actually help to inspire the creation of more and help keep sustainable energy online. Now, as I begin to finish up, I do want to reiterate that there is no such thing as a clean energy source. Every energy source, no matter what, has some kind of environmental repercussion in some way. However, that said, nuclear energy is probably the best energy source in terms of energy to waste ratio. It produces pretty much all clean energy, no greenhouse gases on extremely little land space. And that really has the potential to truly make the US dependent upon clean energy and free of any more energy crises. Thank you.